Have you ever wondered how one blade, at the right moment, could wobble the foundations of a kingdom? In medieval Middle East, there really were people who did that. Not myth, not just folklore. Real men, and sometimes women, organized around a single idea. Get close, strike true, and change power with one clean blow. They're the reason the word assassin exists. Today, I want to tell you their story. The real story, warts and all. Who were they? Where they came from? Imagine a fortress clinging to a rocky cliff. Sheer drops on three sides, a few terraces, gardens, and libraries tucked inside. That was Alamut, the crown jewel of the group we're talking about, the Nizari Ismailis. Western travelers and chroniclers called them the Hashishin, the origin of our word assassin. That name carries myths about drugs, about gardens of pleasure, and we'll get to those myths in a minute. For now, focus on the facts. Around the late 11th century, a scholar and political operator named Hassan I Sabah took Alamut and turned it into a purpose-built base. He wasn't just a warlord. He was a thinker who could read theology and play politics. From Alamut, he built more castles and linked up a network of cells across Persia and Syria. In Syria, the famous center was Masyaf, run, in later years, by a man Europeans called the Old Man of Masyaf, Rashid al-Din Sinan. So this wasn't a ragtag band. It was an organized, layered movement, with spiritual leaders, administrators, spies, and the operatives you've heard about. The Fid, the self-sacrificers, or what people would call the assassins. So this wasn't a ragtag band. It was an organized, layered movement, with spiritual leaders, administrators, spies, and the operatives you've heard about. The Fid, the self-sacrificers, or what people would call the assassins. Power and structure. Who actually ran things? People like a simple headline. The old man of the mountain called the shots. But it's messier than that. There were layers. The very top, in theory, sits the Imam, the spiritual center in Ismaili theology. But on the ground, local command and daily governance belonged to the chief Diewith Makron, the old man, or chief missionary/administrator. He combined spiritual authority with practical power. Beneath him were Diewith Makrones, senior teachers who acted as diplomats, intelligence chiefs, and judges. They recruited, negotiated with outsiders, ran courts, and disciplined members. Then came the Rafiq or middle managers, castle caretakers, quartermasters, captains who ran food, water, work crews, and guard rotations. Finally, the Fid, the operatives trained to infiltrate and, if need be, die for a mission. And a key point, the Fid weren't idle devotees waiting at the chapel for orders. They worked. During downtime, they had duties: copying manuscripts, tending orchards, repairing walls, learning languages, and studying navigation and astronomy so they could blend into merchant groups. Alamut functioned like a monastery, a school, and a fortress all at once. Motive, pay, and how they differed from mercenaries. Let's clear this up. These were not paid hitmen. A professional killer takes a contract and money changes hands. Fid took part in a system that offered security, status, and spiritual promise. The organization provided food, shelter, education, and assured care for families if a member died on mission. But the carrot that mattered most was spiritual, the promise of martyrdom and heavenly reward. They were taught that complete devotion, even death, was a form of triumph. That difference changed everything. Mercenaries operate on negotiation and greed. Fid operated on belief, ritual, and community. Selection, indoctrination, and training. How you turn a person into a Fid. Selection usually targeted the young and the vulnerable, or the eager. Many recruits were poor, orphaned, or socially marginalized. They wanted identity. The movement offered belonging. At Alamut, life was structured. Days included study, theology, astronomy, arithmetic. They copied books. They learned the law. Work included agriculture and craft. The fortress had to run on a rotation: guards, cooks, scribes, carpenters. Training included unarmed combat and knives, compact, silent weapons. They were taught close quarters techniques. Tradecraft included languages and social performance. How to be a merchant, a pilgrim, a servant. How to act so no one would notice. Indoctrination was both subtle and ritualized. A new recruit sat with a mentor and underwent tests: doctrinal quizzes, loyalty trials, and role play. There's dramatic medieval reporting of extreme tests, and scholars debate how much is propaganda. but there's no doubt the culture was one of deep commitment. Leaders cultivated an identity that framed death as a sacred outcome, that made the organization terrifyingly resilient. How they prepared for a mission. The details matter. When a target was chosen, the preparation looked like military planning. Intelligence. Local agents watch the target's routines for weeks, months, maybe years. When does he go to the mosque? Who walks with him? Which gate does he use? Cover. The operative adopts an identity, a merchant's ledger, a pilgrim's staff, a servant's apron. Everything is props. Practice. They rehearse the route, the choke points, the reaction times of guards. In the fortress, they run mock drills. If the guard turns right, the target pauses at step 5. Ritual. In the final hours, the DA with Macron blesses the operative. A small item, a dagger, a cord, a laurel, may be handed over. The operative eats a last meal, prays, then moves out. An essential cultural feature. The act was face-to-face. They preferred close confrontation. Why? Because killing in public, in the open, in sight of witnesses, served a political purpose. It broadcasted vulnerability at the core of power. 3 reconstructions. Famous hits and what actually happened. I'll walk you through 3 episodes, keeping in mind that medieval chronicles sometimes mix fact with spectacle. I'll flag the parts that are debated. Case 1. The assassination of Nizam al-Mulk, 1092. Nizam al-Mulk was the vizier, the power behind the Seljuk throne. He was brilliant, entrenched, and extremely dangerous to Hassan's plans. Chroniclers say a man posing as a dervish, a wandering ascetic, approached the vizier's camp. Picture this. Morning fog on the plains, standards flapping, the vizier's litter being moved. The operative, months deep in cover as a pious mendicant, edges close at a public stop. When a lull appears, a guard shifts, a mule snorts, the operative lunges. A dagger in the belly. Chaos. The assassin is immediately set upon and killed or captured. The vizier dies. The aftershock? A sudden power vacuum in the Seljuk administration. The political shockwaves did more than the blade. Case 2. Attempts on Saladin, 1170s. Failures that still mattered. Saladin was no pushover. He unified Egypt and Syria and was extremely cautious. Fid tried, at least in the chronicles, to reach him multiple times. Some operatives slipped near his camp, some were spotted and killed, others retreated. Why didn't they get him? Because Saladin had tight security and keen intelligence of his own. The takeaway: an assassin's power includes the attempt. Multiple attempts kept Saladin on edge and forced him to alter routines. That distraction was a victory of sorts. Case 3. Conrad of Montferrat, 1192. Shock across Europe. Conrad was catapulted into the kingship of Jerusalem in a period of chaos. It said 2 men, pretending to be clerics or pilgrims, moved in the crowd. As Conrad passed, they struck in tandem, one from the left, one from the right. He fell. The killers were quickly overwhelmed and executed in the scene. The result? Outrage in Europe, frantic letters, reconstructions, and again, political instability. Historians still argue over motives and whether outside powers influenced some hits. But the core pattern is clear. Targeted murder of leaders worked as both a practical and psychological weapon. The end. How a fearsome network unraveled. The assassination network survived for a long time, but history has larger tides. By the 13th century, the Mongol invasions swept across the region. In the 1250s, Mongol forces reached Alamut. Cities and fortresses fell to those armies who had never seen standing stone that couldn't be battered, burned, or overwhelmed. Alamut was taken, libraries burned, networks severed. Some members escaped. Many dispersed into other communities. The military-political function of the group evaporated. What remained was the memory and the myth. Myth versus reality. The Garden of Paradise story and how to treat it. Now, the sexy story you've probably heard. Hassan lures recruits into a walled garden of pleasures, gives them drugs. He shows them a heaven on earth, then tells them that heaven can be theirs permanently if they die for the cause. Nice story. Probably not true in that form. Why did the story spread? For 2 main reasons. First, it made a compelling, easy explanation to denounce a political enemy. Second, travelers and chroniclers liked the exotic. Modern historians, like Farhad Daftari and others, argue that the garden is mostly a later embellishment, perhaps based on an enemy's smear or on travelers seeing allegorical rituals and misunderstanding them. So what was real? The real Alamut had gardens, yes, but it was also a place of study, libraries, manual labor, worship, and rigorous discipline. The truth is less lurid, but far more interesting. The organization blended religion, governance, and a professional intelligence network. Culture and legacy. Why the story stuck? Why do they matter today? Because the idea stuck. Assassin entered European languages. The cultural image, a hooded figure, a hidden blade, moral ambiguity, inspired writers for centuries and, in modern times, video games and movies. So when you hear assassin today, don't just picture a hooded figure in a video game. Think of a sophisticated social and political machine, a fortress with scribes and orchards, a system of recruitment and training, a network that used focused violence as a political tactic. They were part theology, part intelligence agency, and part theater.